So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Just to give you a sense of who we've got on today's call, in addition to our panelists, there's folks from real estate, liquor distributors, food distributors, technology platforms, breweries, distilleries, investors, attorneys, bankers, builders, designers, consultants, and most importantly, all kinds of restaurant folks from front of the house to back of house at every level, from owner to food runner. I want to do a quick call out to a few people in particular who caught my eye as I was scrolling through the registration list. Kenny Jervis, a server at Black Lamb, Tom Main, a bartender at Eastern Standard, and Alessandro Lopes, a food runner at Marielle. You three are just a few of the members of the teams at Boston Restaurants who signed up today, and I call you out as representative of the heart and soul of this industry. You are the people who allow our panelists to run the rockstar organizations that they do. So a special thank you for joining us as we try to think about how to move forward during these uncertain times. For anyone who wasn't able to sign up to watch this live, we reached our Zoom max of 500 people for this call on Tuesday. Just a reminder, we are recording this. We will send out a link later today to everyone on the call. So if you know of people who aren't able to get on, we appreciate your sharing. To be honest, I'm not really surprised by this turnout. I mean, have you seen this panel? Combined, they represent 27 restaurants in Boston and Cambridge and 119 years of hospitality experience. What the diversity of our audience who tuned in for this tells me is how far and how wide the influence of the restaurant industry spreads. When restaurants are hurting, we all are hurting. So before we get started, I want to set the stage for the conversation, how it came about, and what we hope to achieve by coming together today. A couple of weeks ago, it started to become evident from conversations that some of us were having that many consumers, members of the media, and the folks who create the regulations and rules around restaurants, i.e. our cities and states, didn't truly understand what this industry-wide closure has meant and what needs to happen to ensure that as many restaurants are able to come back. Just as a means of introduction, I entered the marketing field working on a multi-unit QSR concept in 2000. I started working with Patrick Lee in 2002, Garrett Harker in 2006, Chris Jamison in 2010. Combined, that's 42 years. Yes, it means we're fucking old, but it also means that we know the hospitality industry from every possible angle. Tiffany and Mike have built tremendous hospitality groups in two very different parts of the city, and we asked them to join us to round out the panel in a really compelling way. My intentional goal here today in pulling this panel together was to hear specifically from multi-unit restaurateurs, because one of the wide misperceptions I just referenced is that it's the neighborhood bistro that's at risk, not these guys. Well, earlier this week, Danielle Hum of 11 Madison Park, arguably one of the most famous restaurants in the world, said in an interview with Kate Crater that there's definitely a question mark if it will reopen. We're not going to be talking about the PPP and how much it doesn't make sense for restaurants. Yes, everyone here did get it, and no, everyone's not sure they're keeping it. We're not going to be talking about takeout and delivery as a Hail Mary that makes all of this palatable. No, even without the wholesales to go, government regulating third-party delivery fees, and lots of people doing their part to support their favorite spots by ordering in, that revenue is nowhere close to covering the costs of running a full-service restaurant. We're going deep and honest and transparent here. We know we are in this together, and there is nothing to gain by posturing and saying that everything's great. Spoiler alert, for anyone in any world that is closely tied to hospitality, it's not. I'm also not going to waste time with introductions here either. We all know and love many, if not all, of the restaurants these folks own. I will share a quick slide with everybody's social handles for Twitter and Instagram for themselves and their restaurants. If you think you might want to share some of what you hear today, please take a screenshot right now so you'll have them all handy. And FYI, we encourage you to do so. Our goal here today is to help spread awareness that every restaurant in this industry is on the brink, and the wrong rules, regulations, safety protocols, and decisions literally have the ability to push them off of the proverbial cliff. The broader we can share that message amongst all of our networks, the better for this industry. That's why I'm sharing now Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito, Mayor Walsh, and Mayor Siddiqui's social handles as well. Please screenshot this one now. Last housekeeping item before we dive in. If you have a question, please enter it at any time via the chat function. I will be looking at them and incorporating them throughout the panel, as well as leaving some time at the end. We also did receive a number of questions in advance, so thank you to everyone who took that time to send one in. We do not have a hard stop today. We'll probably go an hour or so, but if the questions are coming and the panelists are up for it, we're going to get them answered. If you do have to sign off before we end, we're humbled that you took time out of your day to join us. And we thank you in advance for whatever you can do in your own way to help us get to the other side. I also want to share right now my email. Our goal here is to creatively think about solutions. How can we maintain public health and also effectively run our businesses? I know how creativity works, so please, any ideas, questions, comments, thoughts that come to you later this afternoon, next week in the shower, whatever, please feel free to reach out to me and I will make sure it gets to the right person. With that, let's get to it. So I want to start with a quick round for all of you guys. An answer, it's either going to be yes, no, or maybe if you're not sure. Are all of your places going to reopen? Mike, let's start with you.
Maybe.
Pat?
Maybe.
Garrett?
Hard maybe, maybe soft maybe. It's a maybe.
Tiffany?
It's a hopeful maybe.
And Chris?
I'm a hopeful maybe, but at this point, not guaranteed.
Okay, all right, so now that we've set that stage, I want to talk briefly about the past 8 weeks or so. What's it truly been like for you? My goal in asking this question is certainly not to dwell on what we can't change, but to offer a deeper perspective on the challenges that are so unique to this industry and these times. Chris, why don't you start it off?
Last 8 weeks, I think without a doubt, some of the most intense emotions of my career and probably my life in a lot of ways. And I think it was sort of in two phases. You know, the first few weeks were, it was all action. It was triage. It was taking care of our people. It was getting the restaurants closed. It was making sure that, you know, people were going to be able to pay their bills for the next few weeks or months. And there was a lot to focus on. And so there was kind of a lot of like purpose and resolve and you know, taking care of your family and 485 employees, you know, at certain points, I just felt like it was kind of running on adrenaline. And then I think once that stopped, that's when it just got really difficult, frankly. And I think just this sort of long-term kind of anxiety and really just kind of battling depression about what's happening to all of this has been very real. I think it's the uncertainty. It's you know, it's the timing of it all. You know, when can we start up again? When is this going to pass? Will the business I built be able to come back? You know, will we ever be allowed to do what made us special if we can come back? You know, not only can we open our doors, but, you know, we built a business based on proximity and closeness and busyness and people packed on top of each other and vibrance. And is that going to be back in the next year, 2, 3? I don't know. And so I think, you know, this industry for me is some of the best problem solvers and the most creative people I've ever met anywhere across the board. I think the struggle right now is just not knowing the rules of the road. And, you know, they're still being written, frankly. And so I think what I'm, you know, I think most anxious about is just gaining some understanding of those rules so that we can start creating a, you know, a way to come out and win this. So I think that's, you know, thankfully a lot of what we'll probably talk about today, but those have been my sort of two major emotions in this last 8 weeks for sure.
Tiffany?
I mean, I can echo what Chris said. The beginning of this was so surreal. You know, it sort of unfolded in small ways at first, like this thing is happening, what does it mean? I remember standing with some of the guys at High Street, the food hall that we were working on, and it's entirely built out, and having a conversation around, well, what if it was, I remember when the NBA shut down and watching that. And that was like a moment that just felt like, okay, this is bigger than we know. Like this is going to be more impactful than we understand. And having the conversation about what if schools close. And it still being this thing that kind of felt really far away, like that wasn't actually going to happen. And then it just felt like a really rapid game of dominoes without a lot of certainty and without a lot of answers. We went into the same mode, I think, you know, Chris was talking about and everyone else went into, which was, what do we do? To what level do we do it? How do we simultaneously close our restaurants? Do we close them entirely? Do we do takeout? What's safe? What does our team feel comfortable with? And then going from there, we had one of our Sues whose mom had a confirmed case and got very sick. And for me, that was like, just there's so little information on what this is and how it moves, especially then the decision to just shut it all down was pretty obvious and necessary at that point. So yeah, and once I got through that, really candidly, I had maybe a week of just not being able to sit still and really freaking out and trying to figure out what this was. And then kind of settled into the realization that like, there's nothing I can do to fix what's happening. And I think as who we are in restaurants, we're all a little type A and a little control oriented, speaking just for myself, maybe for others. And so the like letting go of, I can't really do anything around this. I don't have any answers. There's no solvency. There's no timeline. I tried to do my best to kind of get as good as I could with that. And then I let myself take a break because I realized I hadn't had a break in years. And so, there's like a couple of days strung together. I didn't really get out of bed and maybe didn't wash my hair and brush my teeth once a day. So that was, it took a break and it was okay for a second. And then, that maybe lasted a few days and now, ants in my pants again, trying to figure out how to move forward. And again, with no leadership, no guidance, no answers, no real questions, lots of questions and no answers about how this really moves forward. So I think that sort of second wave of anxiety and worry is setting in.
Garrett?
It's like a bad movie that just keeps you replaying in your mind. Cut to me in front of my team saying, we're going to get through this. We're going to keep everyone together. We're going to do what we always do, put our head down and compete. Then you're in front of your team saying, well, we have to shrink the circle and we have to get lean and we had to survive this, and then cut to yourself in front of your team, having to let everyone go. And you replay that in your head. It's just really a mind fuck for a week or two. And it's just that the timing is such a kick in the ribs. I mean, none of us have, seasonal restaurants, but the reality of Boston is you're coming out of the winter and there's so many milestones that, inform the DNA of our restaurants. Mike had St. Patrick's Day. We have opening day, Marathon Monday, graduations, Mother's Day. Those are the kind of milestones that, in our industry that, really get us fired up for the year. I mean, there are highest grossing months, of course, but they're just the sort of touchstones where we know we're doing meaningful things in the community. And now we wake up every day and we're so disconnected from each other and detached and helpless. So it's, it's gruesome.
Pat?
Yeah, for us, because all of our restaurants are located, or most of our restaurants are located in Harvard Square, we could sort of see that the university, something was amiss. The university was slowing down. Our year-over-year numbers, each day just got worse and worse until finally the university announced that it was shut down. And then you had this week period where you were in this limbo that, your team's coming to you asking questions and you don't have the answers. And I think all of our knee-jerk reactions is, we have the answer, whether it's wrong or right, we want to lead. And I think that instinctively I knew that I didn't have the answers and I didn't want to give the wrong answer. So it led to this frustration of not being able to tell people anything, which then led to the governor's mandate. And that day, sitting down at each restaurant and talking to team members about laying them off, and not just laying them off, but also not giving them any certainty that we're going to reopen or they're going to be hired back. And these are people that have worked for us, you know, for 10 years, 15 years, that have major roles in our company. And, you know, you want to be able to, number one, take care of those people, but number two, you want to be able to give them some sort of pathway. And, you know, we weren't able to give that to them. And to this day, we're still not able to sort of roll out that pathway to our teams. And it's like, you know, pebbles along the road in terms of each day things change. So it's certainly been a difficult time period. For sure.
And Mike, wrap this one up.
Yeah, the last 8 weeks of, you know, you've heard it enough from people in every industry that it's been, you know, the worst 8 weeks of our professional life. That's without question. I think that more so than that, certainly our company over here, I know all the rest of the panelist companies, these are built on truly interpersonal relationships with our teams, you know, over years and years and years. And I remember Michael, Eric, and I sitting down to craft an email where we had to furlough or lay off 450 people. And it seemed like the antithesis of what we had built and how we had built that communication. And, you know, that Sunday morning of the parade where we had, you know, voluntarily closed, our hardest decision was whether we should stay open or close through Wednesday. And looking back just a month ago, that was, you know, that was just such a small microcosm of the challenging decisions that need to get made. And to echo Patrick, you know, people look to us to make decisions, right or wrong. And most of the time we think we make the right decisions, but we make the wrong decisions. But having that ability to be clear and to our merit of leadership to really be able to live up to those standards. And I think that that's the hardest thing. I will say over here, we have decided to do takeout, and well, obviously it's not a sustainable financial model, as everyone here knows, but what our teams have been able to achieve over the last couple of weeks, recalibrating our restaurants, staying involved with our community, it leaves me with two things really that we know at the end of these 8 weeks. When we come out of this, if we come out of this, that work will not be in vain. And if we don't, I'll sleep well at night knowing that we went down swinging and we did everything we could to keep these things alive. So that's kind of, you know, it's been challenging, no question.
Well, thank you all of you for really those honest and hard answers. You know, I think this is a lot of sort of what's been missing from the conversation. So I'm glad that we're able to bring that today. So it seems very slowly, we're starting to think now about getting to the other side. There's definitely still a lack of answers and roadmaps and guidance, I think. Chris, I want to start with you. You really led the charge in the community from day one, drafting a relief letter for signature by your industry colleagues and walking it up to the State House literally within days of the original shutdown in March. You've continued to lobby, and last Saturday you were asked to present to the Lieutenant Governor and the Reopen Advisory Board. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and why you think that focusing on Massachusetts is more important than the feds at this point?
Yeah, I think you know, I think right now, you know, we along with some of the others on this call are just trying to start educating the people that are going to be making decisions in this reopening process. You know, I think the first half of this crisis was a health crisis, and we're not out of the woods on that one. But it really kind of morphed into a tremendous business and economic crisis. And I think, you know, there are going to be decisions made over the next days, weeks, and months that are going to impact us for, you know, far longer than, you know, this virus might in the next few months. So what we've really tried to do is we've just tried to sort of add a voice of local business owners, specifically in the restaurant industry, you know, to that conversation. I mean, we all have an interest in making sure people are healthy. I think that's a given. If we can't do that, nothing else matters, right? Restaurants won't stay open, businesses won't stay open, families won't stay together. All bets are off. But I think, you know, we're starting to see some states open. We're seeing, you know, the guidelines that other states are putting forward. We're seeing nobody really reopening. And so I think one of the goals here is we want to make sure that the conversation is not only kind of what's the bare minimum that we can give restaurants to open their doors, but how do we collectively work to ensure the survival and long-term viability of this industry? Because right now, It's not a given by any stretch of the imagination. And it sounds so crazy to say that, you know, an entire industry and the next few years of an entire industry and the 15 to 20 million people that work in that industry are in jeopardy, but they are. And so I think, you know, there's a tertiary understanding of that most people have, but we're really just trying to draw some very specific points, you know, as we get through this reopening. So, and one of the keys I think is, you know, to say we can't paint with the same brush. You can't paint retail and grocery stores and offices and restaurants with the same set of guidelines. They're not going to work. I mean, restaurants by nature are going to have a higher risk profile than an office. I think we sort of as a society, as a state, as a city have to accept that and understand how do we mitigate those risks while still allowing restaurants to survive. And I don't think those aren't mutually exclusive, and they're not. And I think sometimes those are sort of talked about in mutually exclusive terms. But I think it's really, really important to be able to thread that needle between keeping people safe and then having restaurants open at a level where they can actually provide the jobs, they can provide the economic security. You know, they're so important to all of our neighborhoods and to our cities and to the state in general. We just can't afford to get this wrong. So I guess at its core, we're just trying to make sure that, you know, there are both medical people and business people involved in these conversations, and then even beyond the business people, that there are operators involved in the conversations that can walk in and say, look, you know, I spend 6 days a week in my restaurants. I know this better than anybody. I know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So if we're going to go down one road of you know, some ideas, I think it's going to save us all a lot of time if we just say, look, that's not going to work, but let's pivot to this. So, you know, I think the gist of what we're sort of trying to do and trying to educate and trying to start the conversation is to say exactly that you know, safety and restaurant viability are not mutually exclusive. But if you don't have those two very interested voices in the room, you're going to get it wrong. And if you get the health side wrong, we're screwed. And if you get the restaurant viability side wrong, we're screwed. So, you know, we have a very fine line to walk here, and that's what we're trying to do, is to make sure we all walk that.
Thank you. So let's assume safety protocols are already agreed upon for a moment. We know they're not. Let's live in that world that they are. There's been a lot of conversation and ideas around some of the things that have to be a part of this new norm in operating a full service restaurant in order to even make it worthwhile from a financial perspective. Things like having conversations with landlords about rent abatement because you can have less people in your space, being able to use exterior space in creative ways so you can expand your capacity, selling unopened bottles of booze to guests to take home for off-premise consumption, extended hours, etc. So what are some of the things that, in your opinion, must be allowed to make this phased-in social distancing approach actually doable? Pat, you have anything there?
Sure. I mean, I think there's lots of great ideas that have been floated out there. And I think they're all important and they all should be weighed based on their merit. I think the most important thing, though, is the ones that do get instituted, we really need those to maintain after the virus recedes, because, you know, we all want full service restaurants to go back to the way they were before this, but the reality is the model has changed. And if we're able to create new revenue streams from some of these great ideas that are being spawned now, then I think that's going to be better for the long-term health of the industry. I know Boston has a program of optional liquor license buybacks that I thought was interesting, that some operators might be interested in to get some cash flow back in their pocket immediately. But, you know, tons of great ideas are coming from the very people within the industry. And I think that the public has welcomed those ideas, and it really hasn't come at the cost of any inconvenience or regulation. I think people have been pleasantly surprised. So let's keep these going.
Who else wants to jump in on this? Anyone have anything?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly. I think that, you know, there's a lot of specifics that are really encouraging in other states. Tampa is opening streets in the exterior restaurants to allow us to at least get close back to 100% capacity, even though it's more spread out. We realize that we're basically going to be in the protocol business after this. I don't think that will go away, but I do think that whatever measures are put in place, we have to have, a collective goal, participatory goal. Like if we know what we're working towards, and right now we don't, and it's amazing what you can achieve, what teams can achieve, whether it's in, just general society and business, the military, there's tons of examples, but what's the mission here? Eventually, at what point do we deem the public health, that crisis has been satisfied? And until we know those things, or know that some of the restrictions that are going to be implemented are going to be evaluated on an ongoing basis so that we can get back to doing business as we were on February 15th, I think it's going to be incredibly challenging. And we will enthusiastically dive into all of this. I think everyone knows that we all want the same result. We want to, we want safe spaces for people to congregate and enjoy, what we hopefully offer. But there is an element of these kind of being evergreen, as Chris has said in the past, that it could, the ramifications for our industry are going to be horribly bad, way worse what the estimations are right now, if some of this stuff gets implemented and there isn't a timeline or an actual goal for those to get rolled back and changed.
So kind of as a follow-up to that, who jumped in? Chris?
I was just saying, I think that's critical is the just the communication, and not just when we open, but the ongoing communication between, the policymakers and the restaurants, because frankly, in order for us to jump back into this, like Mike said, with 2 feet, we have to know that whether it's 12 months or 18 months or 6 months down the road, we're going to be back to effectively where we were. And if you lay out the framework for that and say, if we go 30 days with no more than X cases or X hospitalizations, or there's a vaccine or whatever, on that day, you open back up. When they're talking about a roadmap to open, I don't want to just see one point in time, you can open on May 18th. I want to say, here are the metrics. If we all hit these, this is what's going to happen. And I think that's so critical to keep people's spirits up, to keep us investing, to keep us building, to keep us employing. Because without that certainty, we're going to have to start making real changes. And I don't even know what that would look like. If we never think we can get back to where we were, all bets are off. So I would just really encourage policymakers to lay out that pathway and get input from us on that pathway.
And say,
does that mean?
Sorry, Marlo. I just
let me
want to
just
say,
follow.
yeah. Just if we can get those goals and the metrics Chris is talking about, save operators from kind of being our own worst enemy at this point. We're moving in a direction and going down a road with no streetlights, and that's the sustainability of that is short, and the success rate would be zero. Until we really know what we're shooting for here. And I think we got a lot of work to do. I think that we have a lot of communication to open up, obviously with, on the government side of things, but also within our industry, start advocating for what we think is best and the best course of action to get us back to that point.
Can I jump in here really quickly? To that point, I think one of the things that I feel like I'm a little concerned that was going to be detrimental over the long run for us is this, without the metrics and without that sort of like even a framework of a time frame, and say, this is kind of where we're going, and these are the benchmarks we need to hit to keep going. We have programs like PPP protection, and these feel like really just sprints, right? Where we're just running so fast against a brick wall. And at some point, there's not going to continue to be funding for programs like this when we get to a point when opening and staying open is more sustainable. So it feels a little scary that we're spinning our wheels and like influxing, sending so much influx of cash into it's needed, but at the same time, we're paying people to do what at this point when it's still not safe. So, I understand like the entire, the collapse of the economy and really keeping some sort of pay in people's pockets and keeping unemployment, not being, just this black hole for the country. I get that, but we are going to need this money in the absence of the framework, in the absence of, in some ways it feels like we're being spoken to like children. We all know that we're not opening on May 18th. So let's have some actual conversation about what's real. I don't think anyone's going to, throw the baby out with the bathwater if we start having conversations like adults about when we think this might be viable at 25% and then at 40%, 50, 60%. What does that look like? Let's get specific about those timeframes so we can at least begin to, in theory, plan to move forward.
Okay. So yeah, so what I'm hearing from everybody is that it's not enough to say, okay, we're opening on this date and then we're going to see how it goes. We really need to have these phases that have been talked about, but not particularly mapped out in any way that is realistic for the industry. So say that it does get mapped out well. That's the goal, obviously. And we have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Is there the possibility or the likelihood that you guys might say, you know what, phase 1 and 2, great. It makes more sense for me to keep my restaurants closed right now than it does to open. And phase 3, it's going to be in 12 months maybe, and that's when we're going to reopen, right? Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, restaurants open on whatever the date is, which obviously, Tiffany, we all know that May 18th can't be the date.
Right.
But we're going to open on whatever date, and you guys just might say, hey, we're going to sit this one out and, you know, not come back yet. Garrett, anything on that? Or Tiff, you want to go for it?
Well, the elephant in the room is that we all signed leases, you know, that are related to what we perform at our businesses, at what we projected for sales. And, you know, that's a nice scenario that we could sit on the sideline until we have enough critical, you know, mass to jump in and serve people and, you know, generate the revenue that we know we need. But at the same time, you know, from a commercial property standpoint, you know, we all don't have landlords that can, you know, that can allow for that. So it's nice to think about, but the real, you know, the real catalyst for that is going to be the tolerance for landlords to, and I don't, you know, that's beyond my, you know, understanding of how it works, but there has to be relief on the commercial real estate side to allow for that to happen. Or else, you know, the decisions the decision that's going to come before that is whether or not we can, you know, we can sustain that, you know, that uncertain period, or whether we wrap it up and close the doors for good on some of our restaurants. So.
Tiffany, did you have something then?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I mean, it's mind-boggling to even begin to have this conversation, start to think about this. One of the things that scares me, and again, to G's point, it's a lot about our landlords and what their tolerance, what their appetite for lowered rent, no rent. And I don't think we can just talk rent deferment at this point. At some point, we're going to have some conversation about forbearance for restaurants, because just adding debt onto debt onto debt is just not sustainable with the margins that we run at a normal, you know, normal sort of what our normal business level, much less like kicking it down to 25%, 50%, whatever that might be. So that's a little bit frightening. But, you know, there is this, you know, when I look at opening and what that might mean, aside from like the sort of psychological aspects of everyone being in masks and 6 feet apart and not doing the things that we do in restaurants and having that feel so different, I think a lot about, I know how much it costs for me to be closed, you know, and to start opening and start paying people and ordering food and, you know, paying to keep my lights on, my gas on, and all of the things that there are some, you know, elements of this that are not going to be at a discount, right? Paying people is not going to be discounted in any meaningful way. Probably I can't imagine my energy source bill being like less than it is normally, or getting a break on that. And so what happens when those fixed costs, or those even the non-fixed costs, really begin to, the fixed costs, even if they're negotiable, right? Like even if my landlords are great and those relationships stay intact and their tolerance is high to kind of weather this storm with me, my other variable costs are still they're not gonna be at a discount. So what does that look like? And so if I open, is the propensity for me to drain myself and close quicker and not have ultimately the resources and the financial stamina to open later, or to continue to stay open? What does that do? Does it sink me quicker? And, you know, the sort of models that I run, it looks a lot like I go down quicker.
I think everybody's kind of got like a magic number, and like Tiffany's got a number, I have a number. We all know what it's going to take to open our restaurants. And I think at the end of the day, this is about jobs, right? It's about opening our restaurants to get people back to work. They have jobs. I mean, as much as I would like to think that, you know, the policymakers really want, you know, one of our sushi rolls or one of Mike's pizzas, that's not why they want restaurants open. They want it open because of the jobs and the economic impact. And so you have to ask yourself, are we just letting restaurants open the door to say we let them open the door? Or are we actually giving them the tools and the resources to bring those people back so they can put jobs back into circulation? And so I think that's a really important sort of concept for people to understand. And it's going to just be an all of the above. We're going to have to get super creative. But, you know, for example, I know we won't open our doors until we get to about 50% capacity. Because, you know, I know what my rent burn is every month. I know how much money I'm losing. But like Tiffany said, the minute we open, it triples. So, you know, we would sit out a phase 1 at 25%, no question. If we go to like a phase 2 of capacity, we'll start looking at it. But it's going to be really difficult to try and make those numbers work at some of these incremental steps that they're talking about, for sure.
I'd just like to add too, you know, the difficult part of this is that, you know, the other stakeholders, there's lots of uncertainty as well. So having those conversations is difficult because, you know, we don't have a pathway forward. We don't know if there's going to be a second wave in September. And so not having those answers, you know, makes those conversations more difficult.
All right, guys, getting back to safety. So there's been article after survey after focus group, hands down, the most important thing to people when they interact with hospitality brands and this new normal is safety. QSR is already ahead of the curve. They've been operating with drive-through delivery over the past 8 weeks. We're seeing Insta stories about sealed pizza boxes and contactless delivery. Hilton, Hyatt, Marriott, even Airbnb all recently announced new safety protocols, everything from partnerships with Lysol and the Mayo Clinic to literally sealing guest doors after they're cleaned. So far, other than talks of these phase stages that are still completely unclear as to what exactly that's going to mean, of opening, you know, for social distancing, requirements of mask gloves, paper menus, temp checks, etc., there hasn't been a lot of useful chatter in the full service restaurant space. So I'm curious, what, if anything, have you started to think about when you're thinking about implementing sort of safety in your operations? How do you see the restaurant industry as being designed to ensure guest safety as compared to, you know, hotels or other venues in hospitality? And then how do you really see that as something that you're going to be able to manage? So, for example, if there's a rule that you can't have more than 4 people congregating, and there's a group of people, you know, who are waiting, and then another group of friends come in and they start talking to each other, does it become your responsibility as a restaurant owner to be splitting people up? But, right? I mean, there just seems to be so many challenges here that are going to fall on your industry more so than the rest of hospitality. So I know there's a lot there. So, you know, feel free to jump in, whatever sort of resonates with you. Mike, I see you nodding. I'm going to let you start this one.
I think social distancing and what restaurants do mix like oil and water, man. This is like, you know, it's the exact opposite of why we built all the restaurants that we operate. Our ultimate goal is to bring people together in a space and make them feel a certain way, right? So like the Staples Easy button, if you had a stop button in a restaurant and someone were to walk in and hit that stop button at any minute, social distancing, like, are people going to ask if they can go to the bathroom? Are they going to ask if they can talk to their neighbor? Are they going to ask if they can, you know, those little detailed questions are really, really important with how they write this policy, whether it's, as Chris pointed out, is it 50% of your total capacity and then we have the ability to manage that 50% how we see fit? Or is it tables 6 feet away? Or I read an article yesterday about robot bartenders. Like, you open a bar with robot bartenders, you forge ahead. But it's really about, you know, the devil's going to be in the details of these things and how it's enforced and how collaboratively we're able to work with, you know, for us on the city level with, what are you guys looking for? And how can we best help to make sure that we're providing a safe environment? And there's a lot of work to do. It just can't be a slapstick. This is the rule, 6 feet, 50%, go get them. It will not work, not in the environments that we've created. So we're all in on trying to find the solution. But I think that we need to be very realistic about how much work is ahead of us. In order to do it in a way that everyone deems safe, and most importantly, that our guests feel comfortable coming back into our restaurant. That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, anyone else?
I think restaurants, there's 2 components to this sort of safety conversation. One is like cleanliness and the other is distancing. And I couldn't agree with Mike more about the distancing thing. It's just, it's total antithesis to everything that restaurants are. So that's hard. That's going to be a challenge. On the cleanliness side, I mean, I think we're built better for that than anybody else. I mean, you know, we have hand wash sinks every 12 feet. We have, you know, soap and water everywhere. I mean, we're always wiping things down, always cleaning things. You know, when's the last time you walked into a hotel lobby or a retail store and saw them wiping down the counter with Lysol? You know, it doesn't happen. So the cleanliness thing, I think that's going to be a very easy evolution for us, whether it's, you know, charts to wash hands on time or just more constant cleaning. The 800-pound gorilla of a question is how do we deal with the distancing? Because I'll tell you, you go into any one of my restaurants and you put little groups of 3 people every 6 feet apart, and nobody's going to enjoy it. And I think we need to collectively figure that out medically and from a business standpoint. But we got to find something that works halfway, because what's being proposed is not possible.
I think you know, there's another component of this that, you know, I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but, and I've thought about this a lot just in terms of what we do and why we do this. And, you know, we're all here because we love making people feel good and we love being of service to people and bringing people together. And, you know, echoing both what Mike and Chris say, like keeping people apart is antithetical to what we do. It's not who we are as people. It's not like why we choose to do this. You know, as a quick aside, and being apart as leaders in this industry and people who work in this industry, even physically, I mean, sitting here together is great, but like, that's how we tackle stuff. We get together and we figure it out, and not being able to do that, you know, just adds another layer. But not to sound selfish when I say this, but it's really made me think a lot about if we can't put people in a room and have them have fellowship and be together and, you know, make new friendships and have all of those connections that are so special in restaurants and really unique to the community that we build. Is this what I want to do in my life anymore? And I don't mean to, you know, like, do I want to be a proprietor of a place where people are standing away from each other in pods and, you know, there's bathroom attendants wiping the bathrooms down after, well, maybe that's okay. That's okay if people are wiping the bathrooms down. But, you know, to have this environment that feels so sterile and it feels so impersonal as opposed to, you know, just the embrace that restaurants provide. It's about making people feel good so they come back. We talk about that being our job in Big Heart all the time. That's our job. We make people feel good. How do you make people feel good when a server comes up to a table with a mask? You can barely hear them. There's no music because you need to be able to hear the server with a mask. Tables are, you know, maybe there's plastic and people are, I don't want to eat in a sterile pod and I don't know if I want to operate in a sterile pod. So that's the second level of, you know, this idea what Garrett was talking about earlier, like standing in front of your team and saying, I don't have the answers and I don't know, but we're going to come back. We're going to come back as what, right? Like it's really important to know what that goal is and what we're ultimately going to be able to come back to.
Chris said something the other day that really resonated with me, and I know it's going to with everyone on the panel. Chris, quote you, the reason we love the places we love is because of the way they make us feel when we're there. And that's because the owners spend a lot of time in planning on every element. And I think, Tiffany, that's exactly what you were just talking about. So my question is, and Garrett, let's go with you. How can you do this? Can you create another experience that is equally as valuable? Can we replicate that desirability of Eastern Standard of, you know, standing in Ancoria with a whiskey smash with 3 people instead of 30 people and have that be desirable under an entirely different set of rules?
I mean, I consider myself, you know, a hospitality optimist, but there are going to be a lot of hurdles to get over. And it first and foremost starts with our teams. You know, in our 15 years in Kenmore Square, I've seen Island Creek and ES, you know, participate in the healing from the marathon, in, you know, getting us through horrible blizzards and, you know, a lot of things that would be, you know, challenges under normal circumstances. But it seems like our people always get us to the right spot. But as Tiffany said, with masks on and limited, you know, the ability to create energy and you know, and demonstrate the passion of why we come together, it's going to be challenging. But I'm hopeful that connectivity between our teams and the people that enjoy our restaurants, that we'll find a way under pretty barren circumstances to still create that feeling. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I believe in my people. They've demonstrated, you know, amazing resilience over the years. But it is, you know, it's going to ask a lot of the guests, and it's going to ask a lot of our teams Because let's face it, they're you know, they're distracted as well. They're anxious about their own health situation. The kind of purpose of how we bring people together and the reason why restaurants do what they do, that's going to get, you know, pretty muddled in the delivery to the guest. So I am hopeful, but it's gonna, you know, there's a lot to overcome that I don't know about yet, you know.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think a lot of that goes back to the conviction and the confidence that we have that it's going to return to that at some point, whether it's 12, 18, 24 months. Like, I don't believe that overnight this virus changed every sensibility that human beings have and every desire to be close and, you know, everything the restaurant industry has been built on for the last, you know, 100 years. Like, I don't think that changed overnight. I think it changed temporarily. And so, you know, like Tiffany, I don't know if I'd want to be in an industry that didn't have an ES bar or didn't have a loco or didn't have some of the places that we operate, right? Like, if it becomes sterile and disconnected, you know, that's nowhere that I really want to kind of plant my flag. But I think as long as we can be confident that we're being asked to make temporary changes while we kind of get over a hump, I think we're up for that challenge. I know we are. I am. I know my team is, and I would imagine everybody on this panel is too. Yep. But if it starts bleeding into this idea of, well, we don't know if we're ever going to let you do that again, then I think those conversations become a lot harder. So, you know, back to the conversation with the policymakers, it's so important that we're all rowing in the same direction and we all have a unified vision of what this is going to be. If it's a short-term thing, we can get through anything. We'll be fine. But, you know, we need the confidence that it's going to end and go back to the way it was, you know, on February 15th at some point.
I think one of the bright spots throughout this lockdown has been the public's outreach to the teams at restaurants and, you know, throughout Greater Boston and throughout the country, really, in the world. So I think that piece of it actually is going to come back stronger. You know, people do want to feel safe and secure, but they also want to recapture part of their lives that they miss. And I think restaurant employees can be a big piece of this normalization of people's lives. And I think people really care about that and they want to participate in it. And I think if we set the right environment, I think people are going to be excited to come back. But certainly there's challenges ahead, great challenges. And I think most restaurateurs are hopeless optimists, and to sort of, you know, hear the gravity in all of our voices shows you what a mountain it is to climb.
Anyone else want to jump in here?
Yeah, I think I do want to reiterate Tiffany's point, and it's like I use Loco as an example, but we have like a very simple statement. I'm not a mission statement person, but it's everybody who's eating, drinking, and working at Loco is always having fun. It's a really simple goal every day. The food and the beverage that we provide is a very small part, an extremely small part of what our restaurants provide for our guests and our community. And I think it becomes that ultimate question is if we can't do that, if we can't assure our teams that they're going to be happy at work and our guests are going to be happy in our space, just because we're still serving the same product, selling the same thing, we're in a very different business. And I think if we want to take some of these headwinds that we have right now, like Patrick said, and make them tailwinds and use that community engagement we've had, the amount of people who have, you know, we're starving for this, for the social interaction that comes so naturally. I think at a certain point, it's a, you know, our industry's filled with critical thinkers, with problem solvers. How do we take that stuff that's certainly in the near term going to hold us back, put it behind us, and we can take off like a rocket ship? Because people they'll come back. We have to believe that for us to be in this fight right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no part of human nature that wants to be apart from each other. None of us do. Like that want to be together is not going to go anywhere. It's just really about getting people to a point where they feel safe doing it.
Yeah. You know, I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming through, so thank you to everybody for that. And there's one, Chris, you just sort of referenced it. And it feels like there's this idea that every restaurant is every restaurant. And, you know, by putting particular kinds of restaurants in more of the, you know, driver's seat, if you will, that's going to play, it's going to play for everybody, right? I mean, Pat, your restaurants are majority in Harvard Square. You know, you've lost a good part of your audience probably through the end of the year if Harvard doesn't come back. Garrett, Fenway Park, you know, if MLB and Tiffany, you as well, right? So one of the questions was, the MRA and the governor are working on developing opening guidelines. Has that process been open and working well for folks? Plus, how does the experience in the opening procedures for Maine and New Hampshire affect Massachusetts? And another person, and I'll just throw this one in because they're kind of a little bit combined, is there a way to benchmark from restaurants in other countries? It seems many other places in the world are doing a much better job around COVID than we are here in the USA. So I'd throw that out. I will say that other countries, I mean, the thing that I keep seeing literally thrown at me is that China study where restaurants and how it spreads, right? So it's almost sort of like a, to me, it comes across as a, like a scare tactic, if you will, that, you know, restaurants are where coronavirus is going to go crazy. So anybody want to sort of take any of that, any piece of that?
I can get the first one, I think. I think there's been some limited, very limited sort of dialogue back and forth. I think with the administration. I know the MRA is probably working with the governor to do something. But you know, I think this issue is so wide ranging that it really needs a dedicated group of stakeholders in the restaurant industry to make that discussion meaningful. And so I think it needs to happen at a more street level than what I know is happening right now. And I think the other, you know, point to that is all the most of this is going to be local, and I think, you know, the administration and the governor are probably going to sort of hand down some guidance, but at the end of the day, the people that are going to impact what we do as restaurants and what we can do is, you know, the mayor of the city of Boston or Cambridge or wherever else the restaurant's located. And so I think the really constructive dialogue, which I hope is just now getting, you know, some traction, is going to be with the local operators and then their local mayors and licensing boards and health departments. Because at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones making the rules, enforcing the rules, and they're the ones that we really need as a partner in this. So I think it's a little bit more disconnected from the governor. You know, when he shut down the industry, you know, we supported him and we said it was the right decision at that time. A lot of us did. But I think the reopening process is going to be much more engagement with mayors and local selectmen or whoever makes policy in your city or town.
Anyone else want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of take on one part of this, which is to say that, you know, I'm really grateful for the work that anyone who's been tapped to be part of this commission is doing. I think it's also really important, I think Chris made this point earlier, that we're engaging people who are in the restaurant 6 days a week, who really understand, you know, day in and day out in a really granular level, what we need and how we do this, as opposed to that's like, you know, operators that have a significant amount of restaurants. Those are important as well. I get that. But there are really specific needs. I think, Marlo, you addressed this in the beginning, which, you know, this idea of everyone's this corner sort of local bistro that's struggling. And, you know, there's this mid-level, I think we are all kind of in that category of like multiple unit operators that need to be a part of this conversation, that really need to make sure that the acute needs of our businesses are heard and understood. So, you know, there's things that are being thrown out there right now that are, I think, attempts at assistance, which, you know, I think in theory, they're all well-natured, they're all really good-natured, but, you know, takeout and allowing us to sell groceries is not in any way going to be beneficial long-term. And we sort of talked about this, like, what am I going to do? I'm going to like do takeout and sell tampons and ketchup, and that's going to like save my business. That makes no sense, right? So at some point, and then add to that, like, look 5 steps down the road. So we're all selling booze, which is great, selling takeout, which is great. And then we're all your local grocer as well. And so now you have like, I mean, how many restaurants are there in Somerville, Cambridge, and Boston proper? So now everyone's a grocery store as well. And now we're all competing against each other as grocery stores. And ultimately, like, I'm not going to be able to like undercut Target for toilet paper sales. So what are we doing? You know, at some point, what do these little fixes ultimately build into that's not a race to the bottom? That's my concern.
Mike?
Yeah, I think to the initial question about mirroring, I think it was Vermont and New Hampshire, I think you said, regardless, there's a ton of states that are obviously at least putting out the policy, haven't already opened. And I think to answer the question really simply, go to Atlanta, go to Dallas, go to these places where there's the 50% capacity, the 25% capacity, 10 people per 500 foot, and just poll how many restaurants are saying no chance and tapping out of it. So, you know, that type of stuff I think is more for the optics to say, hey, we're going to get you open, than to actually have, to Chris's point, really open dialogue with operators on the ground level to say, okay, well, we appreciate that sentiment, but here's how we're going to voice that this isn't going to work, or this may work, and how do we meet in the middle to find a happy medium where, because quite frankly, with these restrictions, I think it just needs to be said, none of us are talking about profitability. I just want everyone to know that. That's not even in the question. It's about how many jobs can we retain, and our biggest enemy is time. How much time can we buy by doing that, right? That's what we're fighting for our people, and we're fighting against time. And, you know, to look at how many restaurants have literally just said, I'm sitting this out in this phase 1 in other cities and states is, you know, that's the answer right there. You know, of course it doesn't make sense if you have 25%. For some people,
yeah. One of the questions that came, we had a question from a commercial landlord, you know, tough conversations and they're being as flexible as possible, but right, I mean, everybody's got obligations. So, you know, it's not a question of landlords, you know, versus restaurant or any business. You know, everybody's got it. One person asked this question, which I'm sure you guys would be delighted to have at 25% capacity. Would establishments be open to a percentage of sales as a basis for rent for the time being? Sure, sales are $1,000. We'll give you a percentage of that all day long.
X percentage of 0 is 0.
So, you know, last week, John Mariani wrote an article on Forbes.com about why restaurants will not just survive, but thrive post-pandemic. He shared some interesting numbers. After 9/11, there was the same concern for the New York City restaurant industry. At the time, there were 20,000 restaurants. Today, there's 26,000. Before Katrina in New Orleans, there were 984 restaurants. Now, today, there's 1,300. So he quotes Tom Colicchio, another big multi-unit restaurant owner, as saying that he expects 70% of restaurants won't survive. And so John's thesis is that, yeah, we might lose 70%, but there's going to be another 70% to replace them. So my question is, and I ask this with all due respect for an industry that all of us not only love, but make our livelihood from, are we just being dramatic, right? There's a lot of businesses going under. The landlord I just read, right? They've got debt obligations too. So should we be looking at the restaurant industry in a different light? Or is this just a situation of, you know, survival of the fittest?
I mean, I'll start here. I think the Mariani article was interesting, right? It felt a lot. It was well written and it had some good points. Like, it makes an assumption will the cream rise, right? Like, are the best operators that are the shrewdest, with the best business plans and the best business acumen going to be the people that make it out ahead of other people? And I think that that's an oversimplified assumption about what's going to happen. That ultimately, that article kind of felt to me about Trump saying, like, well, fine, yeah, they're going to open again, but they just might have different operators. That's exactly the point. Yeah, the amount of restaurants may open again. We may rise again. The question is, what do you want in terms of who's actually open and who moves forward? So is it, you know, if you take, you know, publicly held companies that have a significant amount of access to capital, really deep pockets, or you have people that have incredible access to VC money, and then you have cities full of chains. You have cities that don't have an ES, that don't have a loco, that don't have a RUCA, that don't, you know, have like a park. Like, what do you do? Like, that's not a city that I want to live in. So will the numbers ultimately come up and at least meet, if not surpass, where we had before? Sure, that's no question. There's no question that that's ultimately going to happen. It's the how that happens and what it does to the character of the city. That's the question for me.
I agree. And I think what it's going to be is, I don't think we've ever seen such a wipeout. I mean, there's no precedent for seeing such a wipeout nationwide, industry-wide, ever before. 9/11 is not a good comp for this. 2008 is not a good comp. There's nothing that we've ever seen. I mean, unemployment maxed at like 10.5% or something in 2008. I looked that up this morning, so I was curious. And we're in the 25 plus range right now, and our industry is disproportionately impacted. So I think, you know, to say that restaurants are going to just come back with new owners, I mean, my group took X number, 10 years to build, you know, Mike's, Tiffany's, Garrett's, Pat's. All of us have done what we're doing, you know, over the course of the last 10, 15, 20 years. if I bow out, I mean, that's not just one restaurant going, that's like 15 years of everything that we've done. And somebody else is going to have to step into that. But that somebody else, I'll tell you right now, is probably not in the industry right now, because if they are, they're facing the same struggles as us. You know, so you're going to have these thoughtful, you know, city-centric, town-centric, neighborhood-centric restaurants failing. And the only people that are going to step into the void, because we're not going to stop eating out, are going to be exactly what Tiffany said. And it's, you know, I don't think any of us want that makeup. We don't want that makeup of our restaurant communities. And so, you know, is he wrong? No. 10 years from now, we'll probably have the same number, barring another pandemic. But I don't think any of us want to know what that world's going to look like. And that's kind of what we're all fighting for here.
Anyone else have anything on this?
I think that the difficult part of this industry is that everyone's in a little bit of a different situation. And that goes for restaurant owners, vendors, landlords, institutions. And so everyone looks at it a little bit differently. And I hope, and I've had some really great conversations with people on all levels over the past 8 weeks that have given me some hope that, like, people are looking at, you know, things a little bit differently. And I think if we all work together, then maybe we do get to the other side, and we still do have a lot of these unique independent restaurants in these neighborhoods, and Boston doesn't lose that charm in Cambridge.
Mike, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think the guess of 70%, quite frankly, for depending on how long this goes, is light. I also do think that, yeah, I'm sure that, you know, I think New Orleans was referenced, and New York City. There will be a resurrection. People need to ask themselves what the DNA makeup of their neighborhood is and what you want that to look like. And we are certain that the appetite for people to come back out at a certain point is going to be there. But, you know, big general broad strokes of optimism right now are really dangerous, right? If you're just continuing to look for the light at the end of the tunnel and you don't know what tunnel you're in, it's a scary thought. And that's where I think that eradication of our industry in the short term is very real. It's incredibly real. Is that if we don't get the clear direction in how to move, how to pivot, and get some, it's not about timelines. Nobody here is asking for a date. It's about how do we help move that process forward to not only avoid that many closures, but avoid completely changing the DNA of the neighborhoods that people choose to live in many times because our places exist. And that, I think it is doable. To Patrick's point, there is hope. And it's just going to be it's going to be a collaborative effort at the local level, no question.
All right. I've got one more question. We're going to come to it, but first there's some really interesting questions, and I think that you guys can be some help to some folks. So I want to sort of go to some of these now. I'm a first-time restaurant owner that was planning on opening in April. What advice can you give to recently opened new restaurants trying to get started in this time? Pat? God bless.
That's tough, man. I wish you the best, brother, or whoever that is. I'm not envious of what you're trying to do. It's gonna be real.
Jeff Gates just jumped in. Here's your response. Open in 2021.
I thought you meant next April, and then I just realized you probably meant this April.
Oh, yeah, last month.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for jumping on there.
What I will say is this: there are going to be a ton of incredible employees looking for homes, because there are some amazing people that work at restaurants that just aren't going to make it. And that says nothing about whether or not they're good at their job. The restaurants are going to close. So, in a weird, twisted kind of way, you know, if you've got a little bit of money to weather this, you may have access to a pool of employees that you couldn't even dream about 2 months ago. So.
This is a question. I feel like we've kind of answered it, because I don't think this is going to be about race or location. I mean, when we're talking about these restaurants potentially going out, but somebody asked, in terms of diversity, how will the Boston restaurant scene look in the future? Will minority restaurants survive, or will the scene become more white? I think we kind of touched on that it could just be a lot of, you know, big box restaurants. Anybody want to jump in here? Any more specific around, you know, the idea of?
Yeah, I will. You know, I think it's something that we have to think about. It's something that we have to be really intentional about, and we have to make sure that we're continuing to kindly educate our guests and the people in our city about what they want when we have the opportunity to come out of this. You know, we talk about sustainability all the time in terms of farming and our food systems and our food sources. And I think we have to have that conversation right now about restaurants and about local restaurants. We talk about eating local a lot and what that means from our food sources. But, you know, when this opens, and God bless all these major chains, but if your first outing is Capitol Grill and Ocean Club and places like that, like, you need to rethink it, because if that's where your dollars are going when we get through this, or when you're ordering takeout, you know, if you're ordering Five Guys or whatever, and you're not ordering a burger from, you know, yes, if they start doing takeout, like, we're in deep shit, right? So it really is up to our guests to be thoughtful in a way that maybe they haven't had to think about, and make sure that their dollars are spent in ways that are meaningful and bring back exactly what they want. And I know that, you know, sometimes Popeye's fried chicken pops up on my Uber Eats too. And I'm like, oh, damn. Like, and then I think about it and I'm like, that's not where I need. Then I think Alex is doing fried chicken at Bisque, and I need to make sure that I just wait and order it from Alex. So, or make my own damn fried chicken. But my point is, you know, that we really engage our guests and engage our customer base, and make sure that they know that their money is going where they want it to go. And that does make, that matters to restaurants that are minority owned, and that matters to restaurants that are, you know, safe career spaces. And that matters to all of us, that you want to come back into the fold that we have created, that you feel like it is a home to you. So yeah, it's really important, Marlo, to your point, obviously, like, the more big box restaurants we have, the more sort of, like, you know, wider faces and less diversity we ultimately have in the ownership of the restaurants that exist. So put your money where your mouth is, basically.
I love that. And I love this question. And I'm going to call this person out by name, because God bless you. As a landlord who is able to proactively suspend rent indefinitely for our retail and restaurant tenants, I am cognizant that rent is just one piece of the relief puzzle. Any suggestions on what else we should consider as a landlord that would help in an impactful way? And if anybody wants a good landlord, Kristen Keefe, go find her buildings.
For real.
Anyone have any response to that? How else can landlords help you, right? Again, we know they have debt. They have to pay their banks or whatever they do. What else can they do? How else can they be helpful?
I'll say this, and then I'm going to stop talking forever. Just asking the question is really helpful, that Kristen is asking that question. My landlords have reached out to me. I had a Zoom call with them a couple days ago, and they said, aside from what we're already doing, what can we do? And the answer is, I don't know yet. Like, I don't know, and I'm not going to ask for resources that I don't know that I need just yet, but just the asking and the making it clear that they're there and they're willing to work with us, and they understand that this is a partnership. Because, you know, whether we're talking about, you know, closed restaurants, or they don't want first floors empty in their buildings either, you know, and I understand that they all have investment partners that are beyond, they have bosses too. So it's really important for us to not just think about our landlords as, you know, being this sort of obstacle or not part of our partnership, but, you know, being understanding as much as we possibly can that they have giant, you know, financial investment structures that they have commitments to as well. So, but just asking the question and letting us know that they're there for us and willing to make deals and negotiate with us in ways that are mutually beneficial is really helpful.
And I'm just going to throw this one in because it kind of is tied to, and anybody else who wants to jump on that or this. What can those of us in supplier industries, beer, wine, spirits, food suppliers, do to help? Programs like Restaurant Strong are great to support your employees, but what else can we do to support you, the owners? And thank you, Adam Romanoff, for asking that question. So I feel those two are kind of tied together. Does anybody want to jump in on that?
Give us credit when we reopen. That's all, honestly. Like, I mean, I think we're all going to have everybody closed with a full AP, and you know, we owe you guys a lot of money, and that's, trust me, that's weighing on everybody's mind too. But I think just a partnership and understanding, like, look, we're going to need something to get open. You know, we want to pay you what we owe you. But that's a great thing to hear. It's a great thing to ask. And thankfully, you know, I think most of the vendors in this city, I think they're probably the exception if they kind of don't feel that way. You know, I think we're very, very fortunate to have just incredible suppliers here. But just giving us the credit to get open and working with us while we're going through this period, and trusting that you know, that relationship's going to come back in spades down the line.
Anyone else want to jump in there? Garrett, anything?
Just to take a long-term view. You know, it's one of the, I look back on 20 plus years in the industry, and we have you know, we always prided our suppliers are our partners, but I have suppliers that I don't even know. I sign checks. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they do, you know, what their mark in the beverage world is, but that circle is going to get, it's going to get tighter, that inner circle. And, you know, the opportunity to take a long-term view of what a healthy business on their side and our side looks like is going to be really important.
I think it'll be helpful if everyone takes a long-term view, because there's a lot of balls that have left to drop in this whole situation. You know, someone mentioned the other day on our call where, you know, we're in the first round of a 10-round fight, or the first inning of a baseball game. And I think there's a long road ahead of us. And I think if everyone keeps their options open, you know, maybe some of these things that we're hoping for are going to happen, and it'll allow us to work through this a little bit more easily.
One question that's interesting, and there's a bunch of stuff around safety and cost of goods, and I know we spoke about that yesterday, guys, when we were sort of prepping for this. So I want to get to these two, and then we're going to wrap it up with the final question. This is from somebody. I own a restaurant on the North Shore and one on Causeway across from the Garden. Our Beverly restaurant is in much better shape because costs are more affordable outside of the city, especially rent and salaried management. Do you all see labor costs lowering in the city due to this, both hourly and salaried? I mean, this is, you know, something 3 months ago, you know, the labor shortage has been such an issue. So do you think that there's going to be a change in the city now because of unemployment, because of, you know, whatever, or is that kind of going to stay the same?
We're not going to change our goals. We don't want to pay people less, and we don't want to pay any less people. Bottom line, when we get through this, we want to be fully ramped up to 100% of the same people that we had before. We want to make sure that, you know, I think all of us here pay above market, you know, we have zero interest in that. I don't know if it's in the sense of capitalizing on the fact that there's going to be more demand and more supply than demand, but our goal is to get the same people that have been with us for, whether it's 2, 5, 8, 6 years at our respective restaurants. We want those same people back, and we want them making the same money they made before.
I think it's going to go the opposite direction. I think it's going to go up. And I'll tell you, there's 2 reasons why I think it's going up. I think one, if you look at it, labor as a percentage of sales, it's going to go up because I think our sales are down. And then 2, if they start kind of restricting who we can have in the kitchen and how many people are in the kitchen, if I have to go, you know, from a 5-man line to a 3-man line or a 4-man line, we're going to have to pay those people more money. Like, they're going to be working a lot harder and producing a lot more. So I think, like, in this interim, I think cost of labor goes up. I think how much you're paying the people that are there every day goes up, and deservedly so. And I think, you know, long term, I don't know. I'm just sort of worried about the next 12 months. But like Mike said, we would give anything to be back where we were. But I think both percentages and dollars are probably going to go up in the short term.
You know, this is interesting. I think we touched on this a little bit yesterday in our call, and I want to say this again. I think to use this as an opportunity to race to the bottom in terms of labor and in terms of the cost of goods and what we're charging. What I don't want to see is, like, we're not going to change what we pay people. That's not, the city is ultimately not going to be a cheaper city to live in anytime soon. That doesn't, like, even if it was, that's not, a living wage is 100% part of what we do and what we believe in. I don't want to see that get thwarted in any way, shape, or form. The other thing that I'm concerned about is that as we open, there's competition, or even still stay open for takeout or be open for takeout, that we live in the same sort of, like, you know, stepping over dimes to get to dollars mentality of, like, continuing to lower our prices. We already don't charge what we should be charging for the food that we serve, with the labor that it takes to put into the food and the goods that we serve, whether it's beverage or food. And I don't want to see us slashing prices to kind of compete with each other. And that's ultimately just going to be the quickest race to the bottom that we can all deal with and watch each other go down. So no, I don't want to pay people less, and I don't want to have to charge less for what we're doing, which is a big ask, you know. So what I would like to see is some of our fixed costs really be the items that we can negotiate towards more sustainable financial, I was going to say growth, and that's a fucking joke. So, or just, you know, maintenance, I guess.
You know, there's been a number of questions or comments that sort of all revolve around the same kind of idea, and it also ties into my last question that I'm going to throw out now. So I'm going to sort of share that first, because I want you guys, when you're thinking about this, Like I said at the beginning, and when we shared all of those social handles, please share. The more that all of these voices and all of these really smart and thoughtful questions and comments that are coming from everybody who's watching, the more that we can do that and get that to the people who ultimately are going to make these decisions and to understand they can't be made in a vacuum. We need to be looking at this from a really holistic way to give everybody the roadmap that they need in order to be able to make the decisions that they need in order to bring back staff and guests. So, when you're asking as a loyal, enthusiastic customer, what can you do to help? How can we help the message and adding to your voice during the reopening process? Guys, when I ask this question, if you could ask your genie, AKA the powers that be in Massachusetts, whoever that might be for you, one thing to do for restaurants, what would that be? Mike, let's start with you.
Yeah, this was tricky. I give credit to my partner, Eric, who I had to text last night. We were trying to figure this one out. But I do think that we, ultimately, to allow us the golden rule of hospitality, allow us to treat others as we want to be treated ourselves. And so what that means is to put us in a position where there are not laws and restrictions from us making people feel a certain way, whether it's a 50% or 60% or 80% or one day 100%. Allow us the opportunity to engage with our guests the way that we have in the past in a safe manner. And I think that, we talk a lot about the marathon bombing, which I know for G was like, that's the real deal. It was right down there. And we saw an amazing outpouring of support when that lockdown ended. That night was, Lincoln was a central part of South Boston healing. It was where people went for their community. It was where they went for safety. It was where they went to engage with their neighbors in a celebratory fashion. And if that kind of, if that healing power of community is not deemed essential over time, I don't know what is. So I think, allowing us to treat our people in a dignified manner is the one thing we would ask.
Pat?
Yeah, I do. I think that that's very true. And I think, whatever, short-term restrictions are put in place, we don't want people to feel like that's coming from the hospitality side of the industry. And, we'd like to move through that as quickly as possible. Kind of approaching the financial side of it, I really hope that this business interruption insurance gains some traction in Congress. And I think, there's potentially still some time to fix some of the flaws with the PPP program, which I think would help everyone.
Yeah. G?
I think, I think I speak for a lot of my colleagues, we can adapt. Eastern Standard has an identity built over years, World 34, Island Creek. We can adapt. We can be, that sort of town hall. We can be a saloon with simple offerings. We can, we're capable of reimagining ourselves. But without traffic in the city, without some of the drivers in the city, and I have a real concern for how, allowing the universities to get back up and running. What happens at Fenway? And then, even once those things start gaining some momentum, that we don't have setbacks that cause the government, to kind of come back and realize like, oh, we reopen, or we went too hard too fast, and we need to reset expectations, because we serve in a complementary way to to the activity of the city, and we need those things back, and related to each other as well. I need Tiffany and Fenway to be vibrant and healthy, for how that reflects back on on Kenmore Square and the urban environment that we all that we work in. So that would be my wish.
Good wish. Tiffany?
I think my wish for it's antithetical to how government operates, but I would like for them to really think about being as flexible and as nimble as we are, right? Constant contact, be in communication with us, and really listen to what it is that we need, not make assumptions about what it is that we need, and work with us. I'm kind of taking a little bit of what everyone said, but, you know, allowing us to function as adults and as business operators who have, you know, a significant amount of experience in this industry, and knowing our business and our guests well, and allowing us the dignity to move forward in the way that we do see fit. And, you know, that's not to say it's a free for all necessarily, but that we can all work together. And, you know, that in some ways, maybe they can adopt some of the ways that we work, which is to constantly be adapting to our environment and being nimble, and not having regulations for the sake of regulations that don't necessarily make sense, and that are also like maybe put in place for X amount of time without any regard to the, you know, like, if we can lift them, let's lift them. And if we can move forward and continue to do things that are helpful to us. And I think we hit this a little bit earlier, you know, if we are now able to sell booze and we're able to sell wine with takeout, like, let's not, as we move forward and get through this, let's not move the things out that have also been helpful, that haven't hurt anyone. So let's not be difficult for the sake of being difficult, and being nimble and flexible.
Chris?
I feel like I'm literally just going to restate what Tiffany said, but my one request would be to develop guidance, not rules. You know, develop guidance and don't micromanage this process. You know, acknowledge that you're dealing with a city full of adults. You know, acknowledge that there's a lot more information out there. You know, God knows we've all been indoctrinated by everything COVID for the last 8 weeks, so it's a lot different than it was when we shut down. Yeah, I think people are going to make the decisions that they think are right for them and their family. You know, I think there's a role for government in this, without a doubt. But you know, my concern is that it becomes a series of check boxes and rules, and not just guidance that helps us all kind of problem solve our way back to where we want to be. Because I think to think that, you know, an advisory board or a few people here, a few people there are going to have all of the answers, they're not. And I think we kind of need to crowdsource what works, and we need to be able to course correct what works. And I think we just need to be nimble and prepared enough to deal with any flare-ups or issues that are going to come, because they're going to come. So, you know, acknowledging that it's not going to be perfect, acknowledging we haven't seen the end of this, but just saying, look, we're going to tackle phase 2 of this as a city and as a group and as an industry. And that's how we want to move forward. So that's what I would ask.
So one of the last questions that just came through, question for the group: would you consider doing this again in a few weeks or a month or whenever? It's been extremely helpful and seems like a huge demand for information and honesty. Thank you to you all. So you guys are for it, and we're offering information that it feels like there's a need to hear. I'm sure we'll all be happy to do that. So again, I shared my email at the beginning. If there's a question that we didn't answer and you want to get an answer, just send it to me, and we will get back to you.
Marlo, question: are these are the chats and Q&A archived somewhere, or no? Can we see them? Because there's some good questions that would love to be answered offline.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been recorded. We will be sending out an email to everybody who registered for it, hopefully later today, if not early tomorrow. Please share it. Like I said before, the more that we can all get sort of this truth and this honesty about what this industry is facing right now to the people that are making the decisions, the better for all of us. So again, you have the social handles. Please share the video. Thank you so much, really, for an hour and a half of your time. We know this has been long, but we appreciate it. We appreciate all of you. And to everyone on the panel, thank you all so much.
You guys really appreciate it. Thanks.